I'm joined by Kyle Balgames. Welcome, Kyle.
How are you?
Raja Suleiman with Orzhov.
Max McVitie.
Congratulations, Brian DeMars.
Zach Allen. I wouldn't be here without these guys, though. So.
And the champion of Proto Counter-Attack here, Relax.
Welcome everybody to On the List, presented to you by RAW Hobbies and Games in Livonia, Michigan. I'm Zach, and today I'm joined by my teammate,
Raja Solomon.
And today we've got a list of the top 10 cards surviving rotation and standard that haven't seen very much play. We're looking at underplayed cards, cards that maybe didn't fit well in the format but are powerful. You'll kind of see what we're talking about when we get into them, but the idea was to find some gems hidden in the rough, I guess you could say, that weren't super popular before, but we think are going to be standout cards come rotation. So before we get into the actual top 10, I wanted to honorably mention, for me, Doom Foretold. Doom Foretold is tough to put on the list because it has seen play, it has showed up at events, but it's never really been very good. And I think it's the type of card that really got weighed down by Cauldron Familiar being dominant, by Mayhem Devil being very good, decks that already wanted to sacrifice stuff. And when those start going away, I think Doom Foretold has a chance to shine. So I wanted to honorably mention that. Any thoughts on Doom Foretold?
I always thought the card was really impressive. I always found it very frustrating to play against.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could definitely be one of the better ones now that the format's going to be a little less powered.
Sure.
You have time to play your 2-mana rocks without being punished so quickly.
Yep.
I think that's a good one.
It does lose Oath of Kaya, so it's going to need to find some more removal spells that can sacrifice. Anti-Fairy, definitely big losses, but it is the type of card that can make its own archetype. So I definitely think it has the power level to be strong in the new format.
Has anybody tried a Yorion Deaths?
Yep, that's definitely been tried.
I was going to say, because all those little eggs get re-triggered,
Yep.
and you really want to be Esper anyway because, not that you need to be Esper to play Orzhov, but you really want to play Esper because of Dance of the Dance, right? So,
Yep.
that's pretty cool.
It is certainly something we could see some of. Esper's a tough color combination for the new format because we're losing fetches we're losing the shocks, and there is no tri-color land in the Esper colors. So we'll see if it goes there. But I wouldn't be shocked if we saw maybe an Abzan version because there is a black-white-green land that you can be playing.
Or a Mardu one.
Or a Mardu one, sure. There's a bunch of different places you could go. I won't be shocked if this card ends up being good, but it has a power level, so we have it on the list. You want to honorably mention one, Raja?
Yeah, mine's Luna, Apex of Wishes. It's one of the cycle of, what were those called? The mutate
beasts,
creatures?
Yeah, mutate beasts. I don't know.
From
There wasn't
Ikoria?
like a name for them, but
Yeah. They're all Apexes, right?
Apexes, yeah.
Yeah, the Apex cycle. Yeah, this card is just it's very reasonably standard as a 5-mana 6/6 with flying and trample with Flample. But it has just a really powerful ability to where you can upgrade a creature significantly while also not really being down the card because when you usually mutate, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, but in this case, you're immediately bringing a card with you, and it's always going to be a non-land permanent.
Yep.
So it's going to be battlefield presence.
Yep.
I just think that card's pretty strong, and Teamer is still a color combination. If you do decide to go Teamer, you don't have to because you can be either
Blue red or blue green. Yeah.
or blue red or blue green exactly. So you don't have to be Teamer, but if you do, you still have the colors. You have the tri-land, which is important for the new format. So I think the card's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be pretty good. Just a strong card. It has seen a touch of play in a blue-green mutate deck, but it's not the type of card that needs to be in a mutate deck. It just was in one, but you could certainly have it in just a blue and green deck that just wants some free value off the card, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And any deck that wants to be hitting, wants your average CMC for your cards to be higher because you want to be hitting good cards on average, also might want to be playing the ultimatum of that color too, right?
Sure.
So
definitely possible.
Yeah.
Another card we wanted to mention, but was tough to kind of put on the list, is Terror of the Peaks. It is a very, very powerful card. It is seeing a decent amount of play right now in Teamer Elementals that use the Teamer Ultimatum, and it kind of is the finisher with that. You cast a Teamer Ultimatum, hit it, and then do a bunch of damage to people. So we didn't think it's fair to say it's a diamond in the rough that people haven't found it yet because they have, but it's definitely underexplored. It was pretty bad against Aether Gust and Teferi, which are both gone. and we think it is really going to have room to shine, but it isn't the type of card that's particularly good against removal.
Right.
So if there's a good removal spell for it in the format, it won't shine, but I think the power level is there that it needs mentioned for sure.
Yeah, I think the removal spells for it already exist. It's just a matter of people playing them
Yep.
and what the format looks like.
Yeah.
Like, there's certain formats where you can't afford to be chock-full of removal spells, and that's when cards like that really go off.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But also just Aether Gust leaving is a huge boon.
That's a big one for sure.
Because that was like the removal spell that didn't trigger its 3 damage thing. So
Right.
okay. First on the list, at number 10, we have Atris, the Oracle of Half-Truths. Raja, why is Atris on the list?
Because it's sweet. Aegis was my favorite card from Theros. I think it's just such a cool design. But from a playability standpoint, it's a format of 3/2 that can always get you at least 2 cards. There's always those mind games you get to have with your opponent, but it also puts the remainder in the graveyard. Shout out to our boy Uro.
Yep.
So it's a card that really synergizes well with Uro, which is one of the better cards in the format. Yorion, which is one of the better cards coming through from the format. And like I said, it's an evasive body, so it pressures planeswalkers very well. I don't know how well Dimir is going to be supported in the new format. It's not going to have, well, we don't know what the lands are going to be, but
Yep.
it's going to be, we'll see how it plays out. But the card is just very strong. I think it's one of the better cards surviving.
Sure. I mean, we do know Sultai is supported.
Right.
And, I mean, we already have a Sultai land for it. We still have Fabled Passage. We still have Uro. It pairs very well with Uro. I would not be shocked to see those 2 cards being played together.
Not at all.
And, I mean, we already have seen it to some extent, but it hasn't been a very popular pairing with Uro. It's generally been better. Like, the Sultai decks right now aren't even playing it.
No.
But, you know, as it becomes harder and harder to fuel Uro, which it will in a smaller set, there'll be less cards that are easy to put in the graveyard, all of that. It is a good way to just keep hitting Uros, and it's, I mean, just the trigger itself is so good with Uro.
Yeah. And, like, we're losing Hydroid Crisis, so it's going to be, those Sultai decks are going to be looking for different ways to gain those cards while being able to still apply board presence.
Yep.
And that card kind of just fills the perfect role for that.
Absolutely. At number 9, we have Riel the Everwise.
Ooh.
So Riel the Everwise is on the list because it is a card that has previously been very, very bad against Aether Gust. It's not particularly good against Teferi. There was a lot of issues with it in the past format, but its effect is very, very strong. And given that the format is getting smaller, cycling cards are going to get better because in smaller formats, outliers tend to stick out even further than they would in a bigger format. So the cards that are better than the other cards are even further past them because there's just a smaller card pool. And if that's the case, cycling gets even better because the cycling cards fill a role, but they also are really good at finding you the cards that matter. And Riel is particularly good with cycling cards because every time you cycle, you draw 2 instead of 1, and that's just such a good way to start pulling ahead of people. We think that the most prevalent 2-mana removal spell in the format going forward likely will be Stomp from Bonecrusher Giant. There could be a black one that's as popular, but definitely in red, Stomp is the best thing you can be doing for 2 mana in terms of removal, and it dodges that. There's no more Aether Gust, so it gets around that. There's not as big of a reason to be playing Mystical Dispute anymore because Teferi's gone, Narset's gone. So getting around, you know, having less Mystical Disputes to punish it is going to be a really big deal. And once that card's in play, it's a house. You start cycling like Neutralizes and other cards that we'll maybe talk about later on the list. These cards that are instants and sorceries that have cycling, and you can maybe pair that card with Zenith Flare. That's a deck we've already seen in the past, and it's a good way to just make sure that your cycling deck that's looking for a Zenith Flare always finds it and always has gas and always can keep doing what it wants to do. I would not be shocked if this ends up being one of the better cards in the format. That effect is just so strong, and it really just hasn't found a home yet.
Yeah, and you said that Teferi and Aether Gust were some of the cards that were holding it back, but Narset's a really big one that was holding it back because the way the card's phrased is such that you want to be able to cycle once during your turn and once during your opponent's turn.
Sure.
And so, as you can see right here on the card, so you'll see that like now that you're not punished for drawing a second card during your turn, you get to do both sides of that.
Yep.
Also, another important card that's going to be sticking around with Riel is Cathartic Reunion.
Sure.
Cathartic Reunion is really good with the card. It lets you draw basically 5 cards for 2 mana, discarding 2 cards, which is absurd, obviously.
Yeah, really ridiculous.
Yep.
It remains to be seen if there will be any good graveyard synergies with it. We do know Uro exists. There are other escape creatures which pair really well with what it's trying to do with like Cathartic Reunions, like you said. There's the other one, I don't remember the card. The Thrill of Possibility, I think.
Yeah,
the
the
other
instant
red one.
speed,
Yeah, the
Tormenting
instant speed
Voice.
one. Yep.
Yep.
That one also works quite well with it. Another thing you can do on their turn, and those cards are both really good at fueling Escape, which, I mean, we've talked about Uro at length already, but Escape is a really busted mechanic, and it is the type of mechanic that requires you to fuel it, and Riel is very, very good at that. It just keeps the cards in your hand. It wants you to put cards in the graveyard to fill it. I think it'll pair really nicely with those, and we'll see how that goes. You're not really playing Riel for its the growing side of it, the bigger power, but it's nice that it has that, right? Like, there will be times where it's just 7/3, and maybe you can put some equipment on it, maybe you can give it flying. Who knows what other abilities you can attach to that, but 3-mana creatures that can get a lot of power tend to be pretty good.
For sure. Yeah, we still have Opt in addition to all the other cycling spells that can make it grow fast.
Sure. All right, at number 8, we have the Sea Dasher Octopus. Now, Sea Dasher Octopus did see some play, but again, another card that was just so bad against Teferi and Narset. Another card that kind of gets punished by Uro because the decks that want to play it aren't particularly good against Uro. Uro's sticking around, but Uro is now sticking around in a format where Teferi and Narset are gone. So it's the type of thing where now you can kind of focus all the answers in your Sea Dasher Octopus deck to beating an Uro, and maybe that'll be good enough. But the card itself is just super powerful, and if we see some cheap blue instants to pair with it, it's going to be good.
I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, I think we already have a decent core for a flash deck, surviving rotation. So just the absence of these Teferi, Narset, and the cards that you mentioned is enough for it to be looked at.
Yep.
And then any cards they give us in the new set might be enough.
Sure. I mean, it's something you can pair with Slitherwisp too, and Slitherwisp is a really powerful card that, again, hasn't found a home at all, but it's partly because it's so bad against these Planeswalkers we keep mentioning, and them leaving is a big deal. Also, not for nothing, Nissa leaving also is a big deal, because Nissa against these cards was just kind of embarrassing. You'd put your Sea Dasher Octopus on something that didn't have flying, and it just couldn't attack anymore, and a bunch of 3/3 Vigilances not being on the table is good for that card, right?
I will say also that one of the ways to punish the flash counterspell decks was to just cast big Hydro Cases into it, because you don't mind it getting countered, you're getting that trigger anyway, you're drawing the cards.
Yep.
So I think Hydro Cases rotating, and it's also a big flyer, which happens to be a card that lines up against a lot of the flash threats. So, like, I think Cases rotating is just a reason enough for these cards to be interesting.
Totally agree. Okay, at number 7 on the list, we have Rada, Heir of Keld. Roger, why is Rada on the list?
It's so good. It's the best. Rada is like my favorite card surviving standard rotation. I was actually, a little fun fact, I was this close to registering in my PT final deck before finally conceding and playing Reclamation, the best deck in the format, but I was having a ton of success with a teamer deck playing Rada. Rada's a card that we've seen a previous iteration of, Courser Kufix, a card that lets you play lands from top of your library for 3 mana. That card was probably the best card in standard during its time. Now, the format's been powered up a little bit, things have changed, there aren't as many fetch lands, but Rada's still very good. Rada lets you hit your land drops. It doesn't give away information the way Courser did. There's been a trend in Magic where playing more and more lands in your deck has been just the thing you want to be doing. It's not something that you need necessarily to find reasons to do. You just should be doing it because it's how Magic is. You want to hit every single land drop.
Yep.
And this card, A, lets you hit those land drops, and B, has a higher success rate when you have a high land deck. So this card is just really good. It's not a card that becomes kind of negligible in the late game. It lets you dump your extra mana. Like, it was really good with Nissa because you just had a bunch of mana laying around. You can pump it up twice and just one-shot people. But even now, it's still going to be something that you can just use your mana on. Just a really good card, in my opinion.
Totally agree.
And then we're also going to this new block right here, Zendikar Rising, where there might be a land theme, there might be a land mechanic that incentivizes you to play lands even more, as if you didn't already have enough reasons to. Just great card.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention that same thing, was that the last 2 times we've been at Zendikar, there's been a landfall theme. They've generally been aggressive decks, and Rada is, like you said, like a Courser Kufix, but it's a much more aggressive version of the card, right?
It is.
Where Courser was more a defensive value engine, this is kind of an offensive value engine, and it's absolutely perfect with the landfall mechanic. If we get something like a Plated Geopede or a Step Links, something along those lines to pair with Rada, where it lets you hit the lands always and then keep the gas flowing so that you can, have a lower land count in your aggro deck and never really draw lands, that'll just be super, super strong. So, not for nothing, those landfall decks that, were very popular were often like 26 or 27 land decks playing a very low curve. So, in those type of decks, the games you would lose, you'd flood out, right?
Well, sure, but also like flooding was still like drawing gas because you wanted your every single land possible. But that's a nice way to insulate that, right? You have ways to hit lands, and then once you do have those lands, if all you have is lands, you have a way to dump your mana.
Absolutely. All right, number 6 on the list, we have Boon of the Wishgiver. And we touched on it earlier with Riel, saying you might be playing some instants or sorceries that cycle. I think this is the best one. Maybe you can make an argument for Neutralize. Neutralize has already seen some play, but Boon of the Wishgiver is a card that has seen very, very fringe amounts of play, not very much at all. But cycling for 1 colored mana is as low of a cost as you can get. That is, Opt is a card that's seen a lot of play. This, in a lot of cases, is similar to Opt, although it won't trigger Prowess, but for all other intents and purposes, it's essentially Opt. But it also has this 6 mana draw 4, which is a really powerful effect. That is, Opportunity is a card that, not as good nowadays, but in the past was just actually a powerhouse in a lot of control decks, a lot of formats like that. And yeah, it's sorcery speed, which is worse, but this has cycling, so you kind of get the best of both worlds there, where if you don't have time to do it, I can cycle. If I'm out of gas and I have a Boon in my hand, boom, I'm reloaded. And you mentioned earlier, Crisis is rotating, and that's a huge deal because Uro decks don't have a clear top end anymore. And Uro decks also are the type of thing where they want to be hitting their land drops early, so cycling's great. They want to be fueling up their graveyard for Uro, so getting just a cheap spell into your graveyard is great for that. And then late game when you have a bunch of mana and are looking for more gas, boom, I've got a 6 mana draw 4. It's going to pair really well there, but also we mentioned it with Riel. There's a lot of cycling payoffs, and the cycling cards are very powerful in this set. They're one of the better things to be doing by far. I think the only other mechanic that's quite on the level of cycling is Adventures that we've seen at least surviving, and it's just, there's a ton of payoffs. Zenith Flare, the Flourishing Fox. We have a bunch of cycling lands too. Cycling is just very good. It's something you're going to see a lot of in this format, and Boon is probably one of the best ones left over. So I wouldn't be shocked to see control decks using it as their top end. I wouldn't be shocked to see any Uro deck playing the card. I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah. And not to just keep being a dead horse here, but Narcissus leaving. So paying 6 mana as sorcery speed to draw 4 cards, it's something that you can actually do now.
Yep. Totally agree. It is, the two things really holding that card back were definitely Narset and Crisis, because Crisis is just, was similar in a lot of ways, but mostly uncounterable, which just made it better for the most part. But, that card's gone now, so this card is going to have a chance to shine, and that's kind of the point of the list, right? All right, at number 5, we have Migration Path. Raja, why is Migration Path on the list?
Yeah, so you guys should come back, or check back and watch our previous video, and we talked about the top 10 cards with no stipulations, just for the new format. And we mentioned how ramp was going to be important for cards like Ugin, for cards that we might see in I cannot get that sense name right. Zendikar Rising. Migration Path is a ramp spell that it's explosive vegetation, 4 mana, find 2 basic lands, a card that's seen play in different versions, plenty of it. But it's got this great upside of, I'm flooding, let me just cycle for 2 mana. Which is such a nice little... modal cards are good, but ones that are good when you're flooding, when you need mana, are just awesome. And then the double ramp is huge. If there's some 7-drops that we want to be casting, ultimatums or what have you, cards can be great. There's not really much to say about explosive vegetation with cycling, but it's something you should be looking for. And if there's a landfall mechanic, boom, there's 2 triggers in addition to your land drop for the turn.
Yeah, you can get 3 landfall triggers. We don't know if landfall is going to come back, but another thing not to be overlooked is that we are losing the shock lands, which are, the entire time they've been in this standard format, they've been integral to mana bases. They were integral to mana bases every time they've been there in any standard, and losing them is a big deal. They were the best lands. The Ikoria land triomes were quite good as well, but the shock lands were better. There's a reason you saw every single 3-color deck playing 12 shock lands. And those going away is going to make it a lot harder to play 3 colors. And if you want to go 3 colors now, having Migration Path as a way to fix is a real way to do it.
Agreed.
Okay. Number 4 on the list, we have Phoenix of Ash. Now, Phoenix of Ash is a card that has seen play in mono red decks, but mono red hasn't been super popular in standard. It's kind of been destroyed by Uro. Not a great place to be. But we do think equipment is going to be a big part of the new format. Nahiri has given us clues that we will want to be aggressive in this format, and equipment is going to be a big part of it. And we know that escape is broken, and red-white just doesn't have a better place to be escaping. There is no, I guess, Elspeth, has escape, but Phoenix of Ash is much better in those color combinations. And given that we think red-white is a good place to go, it's the type of card that's just going to always let you have gas, always let you pressure. Great at picking up equipment late game when you just bring it back from the graveyard, slap equipment on with a cheap equip cost, and just get in there. Also, it triggers Winota, which is not to be underlooked because it's a good curve of this into Winota. Certainly, there may be better ways to do it, but there's not clearly better ways to do it yet. And we had Winota very high on the last list. So in that color combination, this is probably the best escape creature, and just every time we look at escape, it's just one of the best cards in that color combination. Every deck, it feels like every deck is going to have one escape creature in it. It just feels like that. I mean, there's Uro, you're going to see a lot of Woe Strider, even Cruxa is going to be popular just because any red-black deck wants to have an escape thing. Same thing with Phoenix of Ash. If you're playing red-white, you'll probably want it just to have something to escape. And I don't know that blue-white has one. I guess you maybe play the Elspeth, but I have a feeling we'll see a lot of escape. And like we said before in the last video, escape doesn't really pair well with other cards with escape, so it kind of feels like you're going to find one in every archetype, and that's going to be the one it plays, but they'll all be good.
Yeah, mono red just doesn't have another escape card that it really wants to be playing.
Yep, mono red too, for sure.
Yeah, and like going back to what you were saying about, what we were saying about Rada being a way to use your mana in the late game for an aggro deck. Phoenix Ash is the same thing. It's got like pseudo fire breathing, so it's evasive too. So it's kind of like just a really great way to dump your mana in the late game just to burn your opponent out.
Totally agree. And I mean, not for nothing, another big reason why this card has struggled is Aether Gust was actually pretty good against it. It was really annoying to escape it back and then have it put back on top of your library. It gets smaller, you draw it again, you've used your resources to escape it, they can actually kill it that time. It's a big deal that Aether Gust is gone and that you can find spots to get this card in play, and it's also the type of card that you don't have to worry about very much, right? You can pitch it into your graveyard if you're playing maybe a Riel deck. That's certainly a place you could look. But yeah, just being able to leave it in the graveyard and keep threatening that you can bring back a 3-mana haste flyer at any point, really, really strong against decks that kind of want to sit back, and just a great way to force through damage in the late game. All right, at number 3 on the list, we have the Fiend Artisan. Raja?
Yeah, Fiend Artisan is just great. I mean, this card is it's a threat on its own. It gets bigger. It's a way to find some of your bullets, your great one-ofs in your deck that you don't really want to play too many copies of. It's a way to sacrifice things. We talked about this in the last video. Sacrificing things is an effect that is very desirable. And this card would be playable, like, I wouldn't say it would be playable without sacrifice ability, but like, the sacrifice is supposed to be the cost here, and this you can use that to be an advantage in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
This card, just very aggressively costed. It's a hybrid costed card, so it can see play in mono black, mono green, or any Golgari varieties. I don't really know what else to say about the card. I mean, like, we know it pairs well with Woe Strider. If we see some sort of Aristocrats theme come back, it's going to slot perfectly into that kind of deck.
Yep.
We see play with the card's name is escaping me. The 1-mana 1/1 that tutors up more copies of itself.
Yeah, Whisper Squad.
Whisper Squad, that's it. Yep. Yeah. Really nice card with that card because you always have fuel for it constantly, right?
Yep. I mean, even past that, like, we have, when we were looking at this list, we just noticed there's a bunch of really powerful top-end cards for Aristocrat-style decks. We have the payoffs for them. There's Nethroi, Apex of Death, I think it is. Cauldron of Eternity is another really powerful top-end card for a graveyard-centric creature deck. And there's also Eerie Ultimatum, which is another really powerful card for a creature deck that's using the graveyard in some fashion. So we have a lot of payoffs for this style of deck. What we don't have is enablers, and this is one of the better ones. And then on top of all of this, we've seen it in decks that just don't care about its tutor ability at all. In fact, we saw it in a cycling deck at the Pro Tour that was just trying to cycle creatures into the graveyard and then use it to be a 2-mana 10/10 that you could give haste to with Football Craters. So
one of the key things about it is it just goes and finds more copies of itself.
Sure.
And as you're finding the copies, they're all growing.
Yep.
And so at some point you just have 3 7/7s or whatever and just kill your opponent.
Yeah, so we could definitely see this card being pretty dominant, but we'll have to see what other enablers we get for it because like like is true for many cards on this list, they're all they're format dependent, and we don't know a full fifth of the format at the moment. So we'll see where it goes. But this card has the power level to be an absolute all-star in the next format. All right, at number 2, speaking of sacrifice themed decks, we have the Luminous Broodmoth. Raja, why is Luminous Broodmoth on the list?
Because the card's sweet. And I've said this a few times now, but I mean, like, I think it's a card that's either going to be like a 9 or a 3. By that I mean it's either going to be really good based on how the format presents itself and what cards we get and what tools we get, or we won't see very much play, kind of like how it's done so far. But the card itself has so much potential. It's a great way to, once again, utilize effects where you're sacrificing your creatures and they're coming back even better. They're coming back with evasion, and they're re-triggering their death abilities, or they're triggering their death abilities. They're re-triggering their ETBs. Pairs very nicely with Fiend Artisan.
Yep.
Fiend Artisan can sacrifice your creature. That's supposed to be the cost. Oh wait, it's actually coming back with evasion now, and you still get to tutor for something else.
Yep.
It's non-legendary, right? It's
No.
Luminous
Or it is not a legendary
It's not
creature.
legendary,
no,
yeah. So it's not a card that you need to like tiptoe around. You get to play as many copies as you want, and the decks it's good in. A card that was very highly hyped out of Ikoria, but never really got there because too many other stupid, powerful things were happening. But
Well, one of the big dyssynergies with the card that kind of threw people off of it was that it didn't work very well with Cat Oven. It exiled the creature after it brought it back. So if it died with a flying counter, it exiled, so it wouldn't keep working with Cat. And that was a problem with it because Cat was just the
it
better...
exiles it? I don't think it exiles anything.
I think it exiles on the second half.
I thought it just says if that card didn't have flying, it doesn't come back. I'll look it up. You can keep going.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that it didn't work with Cat Oven, which was a huge reason why people wouldn't use it. But Cat is banned now. That is not part of this format, and Aristocrat-themed decks are going to be there. The other tools are there. Yes, they lost Cat, which was one of the best parts of the deck, but the rest of the cards there were still good. I mean, we had Woe Strider on the top 10 cards coming back. We've talked about, Fiend Artisan. We've got all these payoffs for them, and it just is a really, really powerful card in those types of decks.
Yeah, I agreed.
Does it exile?
It doesn't exile. It just says all it just wants is that the creature didn't have flying when it died.
Oh,
It'll
okay.
come back with the flying counter. Otherwise, that's it. That's all it does.
All right.
So
Maybe I'm just off on the Cat
that's
page.
all right.
I don't know.
Oh, you're thinking of there was one that was similar. That was the black version of it from the set before in Theros. That one exiled and made a token.
Oh, sure,
That's the one you're thinking
Nightmare
of.
Shepherd?
Yeah.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yep.
Well, still, Luminous Broodmoth.
Which I mean, like we should talk about that. This card is even better than that card in ways where if you are playing Graveyard Synergies, it's not going to cheat you out of that effect. So like you don't have to worry about all your best. Like Fiend Artisan is not going to shrink as a result of your creature dying.
Sure, yeah.
So.
Yeah, and just giving all your stuff flying is really underrated. I mean, this is a format where you're going to have to be conscious of beating Uro, and it's not easy to attack through a 6/6 that gains life. That just is not the case. But it is really nice that all of your attackers have flying. The creature you play for turn can block and then come back with flying in that turn and then attack. It makes using Uro very complicated against that card, almost to the point where you have to kill it before you can really use your Uro. So it also dodges Eliminate, which is very relevant. Dodges Bone Crusher Giant, Scorching Dragonfire.
When the creature comes back, it dodges Heartless Act.
Oh, that's also very relevant too.
And then one other thing that came out after Ikoria is Village Rites.
Sure.
So for 1 mana, sacrifice your creature. It comes back with evasion, so you didn't really lose anything. Draw 2 cards.
Yeah.
Really strong.
Totally fair. I mean, Village Rites could be one of the better cards in the new set too. Maybe that was one that should have been on this list.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, at number 1, little cheaty here because it was also on our last list, but it was only honorably mentioned. We have Vivian Monsters Advocate, and it really was the spawning point for this list because we were talking about that card, and it's just like, man, that card is so good. We kept talking about how good it was and how powerful it is, and it just saw no play at all because Nissa was just better, but being worse than Nissa is not an indictment on a card's power level because
Not at all.
Nissa was better than just about everything. I mean, every deck that could play Nissa for the last year played it, with the exception of Wilderness Reclamation decks, but even some of those would play him.
Oh, I saw some decks play that card.
Yeah, definitely. And Nissa was just way too good. I don't think they really understood how good Nissa was when they printed her. The doubling your mana was just too good, and she just won so many events. And Vivian is worse than Nissa. I think that's kind of proven at this point. But Nissa's not in this new format. And green, like we said, doesn't have any clear top end at the moment. And again, Vivian actually is good in sacrifice decks. She has this tutor mode that is kind of underlooked, that lets you, sacrifice a creature, then find something bigger and cast it. And, or it's not a sacrifice, it's when you cast. But again, it helps you find more creatures, right? And she also helps you just keep finding creatures off the top of your library. If you have cheap creatures in the deck, it's really good to pair it with a Cauldron of Eternity or, with a Nethroi Apex of Death, all of those. And even past that, you can just play her in a fair green deck because the 3/3s she makes are just very, very powerful.
Yeah, one card I actually just thought about right now that might be really well placed with Vivian is that Stonecoil Serpent.
Sure.
I like it because, you're playing from the top of your library. If you're not interested in Stonecoil Serpent, you can just reset it by playing it for 0, right?
Yep.
If you have a lot of mana, you don't think you're going to hit too much more, you can dump a lot of mana into it. And then, notably, when you minus your Vivian, you can cast your Stonecoil for always enough to hit right below it, right? So you don't have to worry about finding a card that's big enough to make it so that you can tutor for the card you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
You always have Stonecoil Serpent to make it happen. So I think that card would be good. I don't know how well its ability to avoid multi-colored interaction is going to be now that Ravnica's leaving us, or the entire block, I should say. But something to consider.
I mean, we do know Uro is one of the best cards in the set. We keep saying it, and Stonecoil is not it's not like the best way to beat an Uro, but if you're trying to build your deck in an Uro-centric metagame where you're conscious of Uro, it's not a bad card to include.
No, I think it's as far as cards like that go, it's actually pretty good against Uro.
Yep. I mean, there are very few cards that are actually good against Uro, but it is serviceable, and you're not going to beat Uro by just like, oh, I'm going to put this one card in my deck, it's going to beat Uro. If you're trying to build a deck that beats Uro decks, you're going to have your whole deck kind of have a cohesive plan to do it, and it's certainly part of that plan. But even more than that, back on Vivian, Vivian is another part of that plan. Uro decks, it's really hard to outgrind them. It just is. They just keep putting mana into play, they keep drawing cards, and Vivian can. Vivian can keep putting chump blockers in front of it, can make vigilant creatures, it can even protect itself by making reach creatures if it needs to, and it can just keep the gas flowing. And, card earlier we mentioned on the list, Rada, Heir of Keld, or Heart of Keld, I think it is.
Really well with Vivian.
Yeah, they work really well, because if you have both in play, you can play any creature from the top of your deck or any any land from the top of your deck, and that just means you can play your whole deck, essentially. You just can't play the second land you hit, but, in a low land count deck, maybe like a 24, 25 land deck that maybe has some creature ramp, maybe we have like a 2-mana elf or something along those lines, you can cast basically the majority of your deck with both in play, and then just kind of really overwhelm your opponent. And there really isn't any comparative card advantage to that in the format that I can think of. I mean, we said Boon of the Wishgiver is going to be one of the best ones. There's nothing that goes way over the top of that engine. That engine is very, very powerful.
Yeah, and Zach said try to like fight Uro,
Yep.
but realistically, you play Uro on turn 3. You want a good card in your colors that you can cast on turn 5 ahead of schedule.
Yep.
Vivian's that card. You're playing Vivian with Uro.
Sure, you
so
definitely can be. And it actually,
it's a creature, so like it's a good hit, even though it doesn't feel like a creature the first time you play it. Like,
yeah, but it does count, yeah.
Yeah, so
That's totally fair. Yeah, so yeah, I guess any card that's going to enable Uro is also going to be good. You don't usually play Uro in creature decks, but Uro's so good you can kind of play it anywhere, so maybe that'll be fine. But yeah, just going over it again, 10, Atris Oracle of Half-Truce, 9, Riel the Everwise, 8, Sea Dasher Octopus, 7, Rada Heir of Keld, 6, Boon of the Wishgiver, 5, Migration Path, 4, Phoenix of Ash, 3, Fiend Artisan, 2, Luminous Broodmoth, and number 1, we have Vivian, Monsters Advocate. Anything else you want to add?
No, and if you guys think of a card that maybe we overlooked or we're not giving enough credit to that hasn't seen much play so far, leave it in the comments. We'll talk to you about it. Maybe we'll bring it up in another video that we do similar to this one once we have more information about what's in the new set. Zendikar Rising is what it's called, by the way.
Zendikar Rising?
Yeah, that's what it's called. So yeah, please comment, like, and subscribe.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye-bye.